In today's video, we will be taking a look at another hypothetical 2024 presidential election prediction between Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, and Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from the state of West Virginia. Now, West Virginia was the state that gave Trump the second largest margin of victory in 2020. Nonetheless, Joe Manchin is still a Democrat in this very conservative state. Now, the reason we're talking about Joe Manchin today is because this will probably be his last time on this show. Joe Manchin essentially announced that he won't seek re-election, giving GOP a key pickup opportunity. Now, this is pretty much a giveaway for the Republicans because Trump won the state by almost 40 points, 38.9% to be exact, which is just a little bit less than the margin in the state of Wyoming, by far the most conservative state in the United States. It's the second most conservative state in the United States. So with that, we'll be taking a look at this interesting prediction because Joe Manchin is a much more moderate or even conservative Democrat. Now, I think Joe Manchin will still probably win the general Democratic states, especially New England, where some of the voters are more mainstream, more generic. They won't not support someone like Joe Manchin. But I think for a state like Oregon or even a state like Washington, these are states that could be likely states rather than safe states because these are more progressive states. Now, Trump will also see a dip in safe electoral votes. He's still probably going to receive the votes up to around the Missouri region. These are states that Donald Trump is still going to win, but there are more moderate mainstream Republicans who could end up supporting Joe Manchin in the states that are closer to the Rust Belt. Now let's go into the likely states for both sides. Let's start off with Donald Trump's likely states because he is currently missing some pretty much safe Republican states. First off, Indiana. It does border the state of Kentucky and pretty close to the state of West Virginia. It's a state that I think Joe Manchin could do better than an average Democrat, potentially lose it by around 10 to 12 points, as opposed to maybe 15 points or even 20 points that some other Democrat may lose the state by. As well as that, the state of Kentucky. Now, Kentucky has a Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, who has a similar reputation as someone like Joe Manchin. In fact, he just won re-election as the governor there by 5 points. Now, it's unsurprising that Democrats could still win a governorship in a state like Kentucky. Winning a presidential election is a far greater stretch, but when you think about it, the state of Kentucky also has a lot of these voters who previously were inclined to vote for a Democratic Party and now has pretty much been diehard Republicans. But when you think about it, the state of West Virginia voted for Trump by nearly 40 points. Kentucky voted for Trump still by a substantial margin, but by 26 points. That's like a 13-point drop from the state of West Virginia. If Joe Manchin could win a Senate race in the state of West Virginia, then why could he not end up winning this, losing the state of Kentucky by a smaller margin? We're also going to see that I think Trump will still end up winning the states of Alaska and South Carolina. I don't think that's too surprising there. I also think that Trump is probably going to still pick up the state of Florida. Florida voted with a lot of Latino voters, especially Cuban voters, shifting away from the Democratic Party. The county Miami-Dade alone shifted 22 points to the Democratic Party, and that county netted more than 1.15 million total ballots. Now we're going to be taking a look at some of the states that Joe Manchin are going to win by a likely margin soon, but we're still going to give Iowa and Ohio to Donald Trump. Now, I know that there's a lot of Steel voters in the state of Ohio which also borders the state of West Virginia, who could make the state closer, but at this point, I just don't think Joe Manchin has necessarily the strongest appeal in a state like Ohio, as opposed to even a state like West Virginia, his home state. Now going to the likely Joe Manchin states. Let's start off with Colorado and New Mexico, as well as the state of Virginia. All three of these states gave Biden margins of victory by around between 10 and 13.5 points respectively. Virginia gave Biden a 10% victory, New Mexico a 10.8% victory, and Colorado a 13.5% victory. And these states are definitely still going to vote for Joe Manchin. Furthermore, Maine's at-large vote voted for Biden by about 9 points. I do think that this is a state that Joe Manchin could do pretty well in. In fact, he could do better in the 2nd district because there's a lot of conservative voters that shifted away from the Democratic Party in in around the 2010s, which means that I think someone like Joe Manchin could still appeal to those voters and potentially win the state by closer to 12 to 13 percentage points. Now, I also think that Joe Manchin would win in the state of Minnesota because this is a college-educated state. It has a lot of mainstream Democrats, and there's a lot of white college-educated voters who consistently give Democrats statewide victories across the board here. So I do think that those are voters that could be resonated with someone like Joe Manchin. Now, going to Donald Trump's lean states here. The first state may be surprising. It's the state of West Virginia. Now, why is West Virginia in the lean Republican column? Well, it has to do with Joe Manchin's surprising appeal here. Joe Manchin, in the West Virginia Senate race back in 2019, defeated Republican Patrick Morrisey. If you look at some of the counties here, there was one really solid Republican county that still gave Patrick Morrisey 72% of the vote, but many of the traditionally conservative counties end up being flipped or end up being very, very close. We see a lot of light blue and light red shaded across the board here, and then we see the where Charleston is located. That's pretty much where across the state, pretty much Joe Manchin and Patrick Morrisey were tied, but in Kanawha County, this is where Joe Manchin ended up pretty much pulling off his victory. The state of West Virginia, especially in recent polling, suggests that they could still give Joe Manchin a second term. Polling certainly suggests that he could win re-election. Now, I don't think he would win regardless, but I think that polling is quite interesting in the state that they do show that Joe Manchin will probably win a second term. Furthermore, here, a Senate race is nothing like a governor's race. Senate elections, you have the candidates who end up winning going to Washington, D.C. That's a lot more different from governor elections. Typically, candidates who are associated with the National Democratic Party, especially senators and House of Representative elects, those are people that are associated with the state party. So Joe Manchin, being someone who's associated with the Democratic State Party, still ended up winning in the state of West Virginia, though by close margin. That's very impressive. I think the state of West Virginia will actually be quite competitive here. But I also think that Trump will still win the state of Texas. I think Joe Manchin's appeal pretty much ends is pretty much circulated around the Rust Belt, but outside of the Rust Belt, especially in some areas like the Sun Belt, I just don't think he'll have that same level of appeal. I also think he's not going to have the level of appeal in a state like Georgia, which has a predominantly black population. African Americans make up a great population and an important voting bloc for Democrats in a state like Georgia, and someone like Joe Manchin, again, I just don't think he has that type of appeal in the Atlanta region. He's not liberal enough for many Democrats to end up turning out and voting for him. And although he might energize some of the Democrats in the Atlanta suburbs who want someone like a moderate, I just don't think he's going to turn out many African Americans, and therefore he's going to lose the state of Georgia. Now, let's go to the Joe Manchin lead states. Now, I did say that Joe Manchin will probably have a great appeal in the Rust Belt. First off, New Hampshire here. New Hampshire voted for Biden by 7. I doubt any Democrat will actually win the state of New Hampshire, excluding the fact that if they're a really bad candidate. I also think, again, I said that I think Joe Manchin will have a good appeal in some of the Rust Belt because he is a Rust Belt candidate in a very, very conservative state. First off, I think the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will all vote for Joe Manchin. Biden won all of those states. Biden wasn't necessarily the strongest Rust Belt candidate. He wasn't the weakest, but he wasn't the strongest either. Donald Trump is a strong Rust Belt candidate, but facing someone from Joe Manchin, a Republican that he endorsed, could not win the state of West Virginia. That says a lot about Joe Manchin's electability in a state like West Virginia and also in the rural areas in the Rust Belt. I think that turnout will be very low for Republicans comparably in the Rust Belt if Joe Manchin is the candidate in all 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. In a state like Pennsylvania or a state like Michigan, he could turn out Republican voters from voting. In a state like Wisconsin, which historically many Democrat rural counties actually voted for Democrats, I think Joe Manchin could reverse some of those voters and end up voting for someone like Joe Manchin, a more moderate or even conservative Democrat. So that gives Joe Manchin to 269 electoral votes. I still think that Trump will probably end up winning the state of North Carolina by a tilt margin. The reason being, again, I think Although the state of West Virginia is pretty close to the state of North Carolina, that doesn't necessarily mean that he has that regional appeal. I think his regional appeal is in the Rust Belt. He'll do very well in the Rust Belt compared to most Democrats, but not as well in the Sun Belt. I still think Joe Manchin's going to win Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, which does put Joe Manchin at 270 electoral votes. So he will end up winning the presidency according to this prediction, and it doesn't end there. Although I said that Joe Manchin's appeal in the Rust Belt relative to someone like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris may be better, I still believe that he'll end up winning the states of Nevada and Arizona. The reason being that although the state of Nevada is trending red, I think that again, Joe Manchin will turn off some Republicans who may be anti-Biden, anti-more mainstream Democrats, and vote for not really vote against a conservative Democrat. As for the state of Arizona, it's just trending blue by such a huge margin in the counties of Maricopa and Pima, by far the largest 2 counties in the state by population. And just these trends, they're gonna end up yielding Joe Manchin some narrow victories. And although I think Joe Manchin will be able to win the presidential election, I doubt Democratic primary voters will choose him over someone like Joe Biden. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.